No, the title isn't clickbait. Node is actually considering deprecating all of the NPM paths within Node, which would effectively mean NPM and Node have broken up. It sounds like a crazy change considering that NPM is literally the Node package manager, but it's also kind of crazy they were together in the first place. I'm actually really excited about a future where NPM might not be part of Node. I want to talk a bit about why. The key reason is Corpac. So what is Corpac? Well, let's take a quick look. Thank you to Feck.io for this blog post. Looks really good. What is Corpac? Yeah, David Feck. Thank you. With the release of Node 16.9 comes a new tool called Corpac. Yes, Node 16.9, which means this blog post is from 2021. In fact, Node 16.9 is even older than that. I don't want to think about how old Node 16.9 is. Anyways, 16.9 introduced Corpac, which is described as a zero runtime dependency Node script that acts as a bridge between Node projects and package managers, like Yarn and PNPM. Node comes with a package manager called NPM that gets installed with Node every time Node is installed on a computer or server. So essentially, Corpac allows us to use third-party package managers without having to install them globally or on our development computers or on our build servers. While NPM is most likely the largest package manager, there are some considerations that many organizations have to make when choosing the package manager for their needs. Many orgs cannot use NPM because when Node developers have dependencies for their applications, they're copied into a subdirectory called Node modules. Most CI/CD servers and processes do not allow for a build server to access or pull down modules from outside their network. This is one of the reasons Yarn was invented. Yarn and PNPM can both archive and cache modules on the developer's computer, as well as in the packages that can be stored in the source of their application. I think one of the underrated pieces of why PNPM is so powerful is your ability to cache things better, especially on a server when you're doing builds. So very fair points here. There's valid reasons we don't want to use NPM, and rather than continue this crazy catch-up game of trying to get NPM to be as good as these other things is just chaos. Historically, NPM has worked hard to catch up to Yarn and PNPM, but that's a ton of work. And I think the Node team's efforts are better spent on Node and not on trying to get all these features added to NPM. And this is why Corpac was introduced. It's a script that is included with Node that can be accessed with the command line. It has commands for enabling, disabling, preparing, and hydrating package managers. Since it's still considered an experimental feature, it comes disabled by default. So you have to enable it by running this command. And yes, almost all of us should have Corpac installed just by installing Node. I use FNM for managing my Node versions, and even then, I still have a Corpac binary I can call wherever. Yes, you actually have this on your computer already. I certainly didn't know that somewhat recently, and researching for this video is when I learned everyone already has Corpac. Really interesting. The actual Node Corpac docs call out most of these same things, that there are various problems from NPM being the only package manager shipped by default. Yarn and PNPM require additional installation steps. One package manager has special treatment, so users are more likely to pick it, even though other things might make more sense. And having a single official package manager means all the keys belong to a single player, which can do whatever they please with it. And they specify here, even Node only has a limited influence over it, since removing the unique package manager would be poorly accepted by the community. Interesting point to make here, because that's what we're diving into next. This is the Node Technical Steering Committee meeting, so the people who contribute to Node meeting to discuss what the plans are for the next however long, that was streamed on January 10th this year and got 200 views. This was said to be as a potential topic because it's so interesting that there's a deep discussion amongst the Node team as to what they're going to do with NPM and Corpac. And rather than just talk about it myself, I'll let them do it.
The next issue is enable Corpac by default, 50963.
So I added that a couple of weeks ago. I think it's time to make a decision about either making a progress on Corpac and enable it by default or just removing it. And I'm unhappy about being forced to install NPM, even though I'm using PNPM as the default, and other package managers and developers have the same concerns as well. So that's my personal motivation. And I wanted to ask the overall consensus about whether we should enable it by default, because if we don't enable it by default, there's no way for this to be impactful. And without that, there's no way for us to remove NPM as a dependency of Node binary.
I think what Yag's saying here is really important. The value of Corpac isn't that it exists, it's that it's the default, because that's what will enable us to both leave NPM behind properly if it's not the right solution for us, but also for these pieces to just behave, where you open up a Node project and you run the start command or you run the install command, and whatever that project needs is what gets used. So you no longer have to worry about having the right package manager set up to run a project. You just run the project and Node figures it out for you. That doesn't work if it's not enabled by default, because now we're still doing config, we're still in the same hell we already are. It just doesn't make sense to have both.
I do not see a good technical reason to migrate them out. Okay. We are moving into a political realm more than and being fair and not picking winners, whatever.
I want to be very clear. I absolutely love Matteo. He's one of my favorite people in the JavaScript ecosystem. He's one of the first people to discover me and what I was doing, and I owe him a ton. I don't love the political point here simply because it already happened. Node picked a winner. You picked NPM. By removing it, you're actually being less political. You're no longer choosing it. Does that mean it will do worse? Sure. But the political aspect of like, you're picking a winner? No, you're preventing a loser right now. And that's a very different thing.
There is an advantage of shipping NPM with Node, okay, which is on the stability of the build. So if I do NPM install, I know, and if I install Node, I know that there is that version of NPM in.
I really don't love this point. The argument here is that people don't have specific versions of package managers most of the time, so you don't have a reproducible build. Whereas they do have specific Node versions, so NPM does allow that. One of the things you can do with Corpack is specify a specific version of a package manager. You don't have to specify. You could say, I need this version of PNPM, or this version of Yarn, or even this version of NPM. So it's 2 commands instead of 1, but I don't know if that fits my definition of reproducible versus not reproducible builds.
I think Node.js should be in the correct place about whether to give advantages or disadvantages over something. And as a user, in order to install another package manager, I have to use NPM right now. So I recommend either enabling Corpack by default and removing NPM, or recommend shipping PNPM Yarn with Node as well. But then the question becomes, Bun has an installer as well. So are we going to ship Bun with Node? And then the answer becomes much more obvious. So it's like a slippery slope on both ends, has its concerns, but not making a decision is the worst thing in my honest opinion. I just wanted to learn, why do you think that removing NPM is not a possible scenario out of this?
People expect NPM to be there for historical reasons. So, this unfairness, you could argue, but without NPM, Node wouldn't be what it is. So there is a historical and expectation question here.
It would essentially be a huge breaking change. Like, think of all the Node version managers out there that like switch a version of Node and a version of NPM at the same time. There's a lot of things that would break if we were to just take NPM out.
Because these things have been interwoven in this way, there is now a bunch of tooling we've had to build that does twice as much work as it needs to. That's not an argument for it. That's an argument against it. That's a reason we should rethink the role of Node in terms of package management. There's a lot of things that would break argument I don't love. You can still use an old version of Node when a new one comes out. In fact, old ones tend to be maintained pretty well and get updates for a long time. This is not meant to disrespect anyone on this panel. He's some of the most technically talented people in the world. And a huge part of why Node has maintained its place as a stable, powerful solution for real software all over the world is because of the level of care and pushback these individuals have put into every decision Node has made. If it wasn't for this, the technology wouldn't be stable and we'd be in utter chaos all of the time. So despite whether or not I agree with the reasons they're pushing back, their role here is important. And I think they're doing a pretty good job of holding the line and making sure we don't make things too difficult for ourselves.
If you're voting for removal of NPM, the alternative should be adding more package managers to Node.js binary. It's not like, should we remove NPM, yes or no question. It's like, if we want to make things right, let's vote either removing NPM or adding more package managers, because the middle ground is where we are right now.
I love this point from Yag. This is what I was looking for, because it feels like we're pursuing fairness. And in the pursuit of fairness, having just NPM makes no sense. And we don't fix this by including everything or making a bunch of binaries that have every potential subset or superset of things you might want. We need to go all in or back out.
If you don't remove NPM, then we are back where we started.
Does it even make sense to add Corpack if we don't remove NPM?
I actually like this question a lot. This was when I started loving what Robert had to say. It's a very fair point. Corpack's role is to pick the package manager you selected. And if that is the default, why are you shipping NPM still?
With Corpack, there's no reproducibility on the build. Okay, if you have a Docker image, most people will say Corpack enable, or if it's enabled by default, they just do pnpm install, and then you don't know which version of npm you're getting, and tomorrow your build will not work anymore, and you start blaming us big time. So it's basically giving people a foot gun to shoot themselves. It's bad.
I think that the bit at the end there is the part that I've been missing from his argument. It's not that builds aren't reproducible with the new stuff. It's that by default, there is now a foot gun where if you specify a Node version and don't specify a package manager version, that could get messy for reproducibility, which is fair-ish, but I don't think that's a good enough reason to block this. Again, though, like they are so crazy focused on stability. And the point you made there of like, is a ticking time bomb. We don't know how many people are going to include the version when they use Corpac. They might just say PNPM. They might say PNPM at version 6 or something like that. And we don't know how big the problem is until we have it. That said, we already have this problem. People use PNPM unless they specify the right version. I have this problem right now with PNPM when I fetch a repo that I want to contribute to that uses PNPM. It happens to use a different version. They didn't specify it correctly in the right random one-off config file that my particular like Node version manager tool does or doesn't read. And now I'm already in this hell where I'm breaking lock files constantly.
I think I kind of agree with Richard that like we probably are not going to come to an agreement. And, maybe, I tried to put in like the key questions because, as Robert mentioned, like if it's not a goal to remove NPM, then like, does Corpac make sense at all is a reasonable question. I think Yagiz said like, I'm good with like either making it stable and removing NPM at some point or removing it. I think it'd be good to make sure that, if we do include it and have that extra work, and, that people actually believe that that's worthwhile versus an in-between one that nobody thinks is a good idea. I have 3 questions. I don't know, like if this represents what we really need to, vote on is like, we agree our goal is to remove NPM from Node.js or for like yes or no. If we're not going to remove NPM, should Corpac be included in Node.js? And then should we enable Corpac by default, yes or no?
It's incredibly difficult to take a conversation like that and break it down into the specific questions that have to be answered. Question 1 was, should NPM be removed from Node? I don't have a strong stance on this all, believe it or not. And honestly, I want your guys' thoughts in the comments. So let me know if you think NPM belongs within Node itself. Question 2 is, if NPM is still part of Node, does Corpac even make sense? Why would you have both a default package manager and a solution for managing default package managers? That is a confusing thing to maintain both of, and a decision should be made. Do we keep Corpac or not if NPM is kept? Then the third question of, should Corpac be the default? Again, I think this depends a lot on that first question, but I could be convinced either way. Corpac would help us a ton with the many different projects we're maintaining at Ping, with Upload Thing, the Ping website, all the open source stuff we do. I could be convinced to turn on the default. In fact, I'd probably like it quite a bit, but we have to decide on those first 2 things initially. I think that's all I have to say on this one. We're still very early in the process here, but I'd love your thoughts. Let me know in the comments. Do you think NPM should stay part of Node, or is it time these things break up? If you want to hear more about NPM weirdness, I'll pin a video in the corner where I go in depth on how one package broke all of NPM's registry for a bit. Until next time, see you guys later. Peace, nerds.